Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Your Stake, Your Story, a video series focused on highlighting best practices of financial advisors within the ESG space. Today, I'm really excited to have James Brewer here. And James has a pretty great resume. James is an MBA, a CDFA, a CFSLA, a CFP, who empowers people to make smarter money choices aligned with their values, goals, and passions. A certified financial planner, he has been named to the 20 best financial advisors in Chicago by Expertise in 2017, 2018, 2021, and now 2022. His many designations include a chartered retirement planning counselor, chartered divorce financial analyst, and chartered funding and student loan advisor. So, James, I'm really excited to have you on, and thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
So, James, I just have to say, because I've got my poster behind me. When we first met, this poster was something that we immediately bonded over. It's Miles Davis for anyone that might be listening to the audio only. And I would love to hear, just to begin with, if you have any particular stories or things that you want to share about music or Miles in particular before we dive into to some of the nitty gritty on your practice.
Well, he probably was one of the early folks that kind of turned me on to jazz. I'm a drummer, turned into a percussionist later. So I just enjoy people who are quite talented, and he's one of the best, and just enjoy knowing that I'm not the only one who appreciates him.
So now you're an ESG focused financial advisor, like we talked about. And what I'd love to start with is a little bit of your story. What brought you into financial advice and what brought you into ESG? Did those happen at the same time? That would be great to hear.
Well, it's an interesting story that I went to a National Black MBA Association meeting that a gentleman spoke at, and I thought, man, this is really amazing. I really need to go and get an advisor for myself. Meanwhile, my wife and I, we were kind of recently married. I was reading up on some things and told this one advisor that was the advisor for her SEP plan that we wanted to invest in companies that would actually hire me as an MIT Sloan MBA. I had beliefs that I'd never have a problem getting hired. And yet that wasn't my experience post Sloan. And a couple of weeks later, he goes, "Hey, look, I've got this great portfolio for you. And well, and then you can give it to charity. You're going to make a lot of money and then you can give to charity later on." And I'm like, wow, dude, you're looking at me and you're saying that I am a charity and that, me wanting to simply invest in companies that had better diversity practices. So I felt like he didn't hear me at all. So meanwhile, we did hire the other gentleman who happened to be Black. And after a couple of meetings, he said, "I never really had anybody take to this the way that you have. Had you ever considered getting to the industry?" So I had been working for an employer. Things didn't work out well there. And I was trying to figure out what my next move was going to be. So I said, "Oh, well, maybe my undergrad in finance and, some of the classes that I had at Sloan could work well as being a financial advisor slash wealth advisor." And actually, oddly, at Sloan, this is the first time I'd ever heard of what the phrase wealth management. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because nobody ever explained what wealth management was. I don't know why we struggle with, we have been struggling in explaining what that is. And that kind of launched me in to the career. Started early with Ameriprise, and I was the guy that wanted to, look and find the companies that were actually doing ESG investing, and kind of became Mr. ESG at the office that I was at. And people would come to me if they ever had anyone who asked them about ESG, but nobody ever cared to really understand the details. I did. And fortunately, the regional vice president from Calvert at the time took a liking to me because of my interest and did some promotion. And I got the opportunity to be quoted in one of Ameriprise's magazines, because one of the few people, like, wow, of all the people in the country, I'm relatively new to the industry and they find me to talk about the topic.
That's amazing. That I want to actually touch on a quick thing that you brought up a little earlier on. You said that what inspired you and motivated you was someone saying, "Why would you care about ESG? Just have the most financial performance and then donate to charity." Is that something that you're still running into? Are people still saying that? How do you think about and deal with that type of question?
Well, I generally am attracting people through my presentation and my marketing that they're going to hear something about their values.
Mhm,
So, one of the things I tell people is I help them make smarter money moves that are aligned with their values.
mhm.
So, like from day one. And what does that mean? So, I'm really starting the conversation around that. So, some people will bring up, well, no, what is it going to cost me? Da, da, da. I'm like, well, some of the people catch themselves and say, well, but should I be principally minded? But what about my returns? And I'm like, well, what if you found out that while you were getting quote unquote good returns, whatever those are, you could get better returns? So, in the modeling that I started doing, we are actually getting better returns than some popular, I'm going to be careful in this podcast, but,
Sure.
but some, popular off the shelf, publicly traded company mutual funds and their asset allocation funds, which I use that as a benchmark for us internally, that we're actually getting better returns than those are getting. So if I'm tangibly showing you're getting better returns, why would you? So I've even some people that, would say, well, I really want to make returns, but I don't think they really understand as much. Mike, but what if I told you that every company incorporates some way to determine of all of the stocks and bonds they have, which ones are going to invest in? And usually that secret sauce is never given out, right? I mean, that's kind of a trade secret. But what if they actually were screening? And that's how that was their secret sauce. It's just that they weren't telling you that was their secret sauce. So it's weird to me that sometimes when people hear, well, what if I told you part of my secret sauce is actually integrating those values? And it would just only make sense that, well, companies who would get sued a lot and have lots of PR issues around not hiring women or, every so often racist video that seems to show up and, the stock takes a hit for a little bit, so it takes it. So I don't know why people like if you explain it that way. So you might not even care, but what you care is the shareholder value. So companies that tend to care about those things, and we can argue that's governance, the G, because often when we hear ESG, I think we are hearing ES and we're not hearing the G. To me, that really is the G part of things. And maybe G leads you over into ENS.
Cool. So it sounds like what your case is a financial performance case that it's a false trade-off between ESG and charity, that ESG is going to help you with performance. And also, oh, by the way, you're going to get this great performance. Why not also align your investment with your values? And it contributes that way too. I love that. I think
Correct.
that makes sense. So I want to jump back to your story a little bit too. We left off at Ameriprise. How'd you go from Ameriprise to Envision? What was that transition like? What was that journey like? Why'd you make the decision? And how's it
Man, I love that question. Okay.
been?
So all this is public disclosure anyway. So I kind of got recruited to a place called BC Ziegler, which was a regional broker dealer. But, my desire to actually do financial planning, I've always been a fan of financial planning. And really, we should say, if you're going on vacation, did you just like go to the airport and figure it out? Or get on a train or no, usually you're like, well, where do I want to go? And I'm taking a car if I'm going to drive or if I'm going to go, right? Like
Yep.
instead, that's not like how we think with money. Well, just invest. So just put gas in the car and go. And if that leads you to the airport, I guess that's okay. Anyway, so like, no, let's do financial planning. And, the logo behind me has something to do with the philosophy that we use in financial planning. So I go to a place and they're not like really embracing financial planning in the way that I wanted to. And eventually I'm like, this isn't really the right place for me. So I discover LPL Financial, largest independent. So I go there. And at the time I was really thinking that I wanted to do more with retirement plans and help people through their 401k, 403b, 457 plan. And I felt that they had a program there that I could qualify for and that I would get the support in being able to do that. Plus, I wasn't limited in terms of what I could get in terms of my ESG type investments. So, a lot of people don't realize that I really say there's open architecture and limited architecture, and even open architecture, our open architecture probably has some limits. But a lot of advisors don't even know. I went to a conference where the advisor said, well, the only thing we have on our platform is this Calvert fund or a couple of Calvert funds. I'm like, well, there's a universe much larger than that out there. So depending upon the firm, or they'll sometimes with one company, I remember, they said they had dimensional fund advisors, but they had one fund. So they might list like in which, marketing wise seems like, oh, you have the full constellation,
With
but
the logo
no,
up
you
there.
only have one fund, right? So then if the advisor goes and looks and says, well, see, these aren't good investments. Well, they only showed you one.
Mhm.
So if you only showed one, how in the heck, right? So anyway, so I go to LPL, have more things going on, but I really was trying to go down that, road as well. I got an article that I wrote about incorporating values into 401k menu selection using the accredited investment fiduciary framework.
Mhm.
So, I've been doing this in a fiduciary because, oh, geez, you'll want to add these ESG funds in there because then you won't make money. Again, if you're going to make more money, so I can make a case that it says, well, if I didn't tell you that that was the reason for my selection and just put it on it, and you said, oh, that's amazing. But if I say, oh, but that's an ESG, oh, God, oh, well, ESG, I'm like, well, wait, like maybe, so, if you sort this thing right, so anyway, so I think I can go and dispel a bunch of stuff. So eventually, with LPL, I felt in my case that I wanted to forward this new category called subscription-based financial planning.
Mhm.
And at where I finally got to, I didn't feel as though that their support of that was as awesome as I could potentially go and do it on my own. And there were other ways and other ways I could get access to that. So I felt that that would be helpful. And as well, I at some point decided that I didn't like the idea of dual registration. I just wanted to be an investment advisor representative, and the investments that I could get access to were great without needing that dual registration. And I didn't really want the kinds of clients that required more of a brokerage kind of, or I should say a stockbroker registered representative. So I said, let's take the plunge and become a registered investment advisory
Mhm.
firm. So, I did that in 2018 and really haven't looked back much since then. There's a lot easier to do marketing than have the extra layer that I used to have. So, doing this podcast, for example, I don't have to go and check with LPL's marketing team. And I happen to write articles for Forbes now. And someone recently actually did read the one that I wrote about private prisons being in your investments. And so there's things I can say and do now where I don't have somebody else asking me or questioning or telling me no. There were times when LPL would say no when I felt there was no risk.
And that Forbes article I loved, by the way, and I'll be happy to put that in the description or share that as part of the content with the podcast because it was a really good article, and I definitely read that, and that was really cool. I have two big questions now on follow up from what you just said about starting Envision in 2018. The first one is when you started Envision, did you start from the beginning marketing it as an ESG focused firm, or was it, hey, let's take care of your financial planning needs and you're able to have the ESG conversation with anyone? Like, how much did that feed into your marketing and your branding and your core from the start?
Well, I like to use the phrase values based financial life planning as a encompassing term. So in some ways, like lead certification, right, for a building. So not to already go to the investing side. So if you said, I want to give X amount of money per year to something, if I want to advocate, if I want to work for whatever that is with the person, and then trying to figure out like, how do we infuse their values in every aspect of their life? Like I have always said to do a march on Saturday, to do, maybe a monthly contribution to some charity, and Monday through Friday trading time, you're doing the exact opposite of those things. It just doesn't seem to make sense. So I would want to say, let me help you if you want to, give more money to something, if you want to give more time. And then if you want to Monday through Friday during trading hours, also make sure that your investments are as closely aligned, because I really don't think that, like the guy said, well, you'll make a lot of money and then give it to charity. Well, but it was King, and I'm going to misquote it, that the very reason that the charity exists is because of the thing that you're doing Monday through Friday, right? Then it doesn't clean it up.
Mhm.
So that's my belief. And, I'm pretty overt with clients in, that thinking, and just try to encourage them, because, often they're hearing noise on the side. I did have somebody who said, well, you know, how much will my, I don't know, $500 a month investment change things? Right. And I'm like, but if you're 500 times a million people, like, we have a lot of things in life where it's small transactions multiplied by a lot of people. You go,
Mhm.
buy a Happy Meal. That's not too much money, right? But hey, they sell a lot of Happy Meals. The next thing you know, you're making some money, right? But
Mhm.
but but sometimes, I don't know, like, the world makes people think that I really can't go make a difference. Everyone's not going to be the kind of person who's going to be the one who gets into a protest and marches, right? And writes letters and all that stuff. I said, but you could be the kind of person who does that through your investing. And I'm even trying to encourage those other people who are doing the protesting and stuff. But sometimes I hear go, but, like, I'm a Vanguard person, or I'm a whatever, I'm a do it yourself. And I'm like, okay, so do you know that Vanguard has choices? And usually they do not. Like, they only heard that spiel about low cost investing, which often came out of, well, I don't trust an advisor,
Mm.
as opposed to, is that the real best thing for, right? Like, I don't really trust you. So fixing the trust issue, that allows me then to say, really, this portfolio allocation stuff's a lot more complicated. And if you've never had any classes, in academia, or seeking the certified financial planner designation, and even that, if you don't do it really for a living, right? Like, how did I stumble upon your stake? How did I stumble upon Morningstar Advisor Workstation? We know that the people saying you can do it yourself don't have those tools. So how in the world could they actually do better than me? Because not only do I have the tools, but I have, spent time to even know that I should have a tool like this, to then spend time to know how to use the tool.
Mhm.
So, ideally through, telling them different things than they probably heard before, trying to build up the trust that then says, yes, be encouraged to follow your values. And we're never going to be perfect. We're doing the best that we can, but we're going to continue to pursue being better.
I love that. And I'd also love to dive in a little bit more to what you're saying in terms of the tools and the actual functioning of this. So I think you nailed the messaging. That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm sure it's really compelling as you're talking to people. When you're starting your ESG practice, can you tell me more about what had to go into that and what challenges you ran into? For example, do you just pick a couple ESG funds and now you're ESG, or do you need a mission statement, or what are all the things that went into actually running an ESG practice instead of financial planning practice that maybe has an ESG fund or two?
Let me give you some history to say how we got where we're at today.
Perfect.
So, when I first got into the industry, Calvert was the one that threw a merit prize. That was a biggie. So I learned a few things about what they had, but to me, it was always about the portfolio, which I often call these days investment recipe. I'm a big cook. So, the first thing is you want the superior recipe, and then the superior recipe, even if I have cheap ingredients or I have the most expensive ingredients, sometimes I don't know that I can discern the taste of the most expensive if the other is put together well, right? And it's
Mhm.
the incremental costs and all that stuff. Just take that analogy. So over time, I'm like, but there's a bigger set out there. Well, if you are limited, you might not be able to do fee-based accounts. And at one point you couldn't do the fee-based accounts didn't have the letters, the selling letters in place, da, 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 right? So you got that. Well, for a while, I'm like, should I really be pursuing financial planning more so than investing? So I looked for a couple of partners that could help me do that and I could outsource to them. Well, eventually I started kind of snooping around a little bit more. I mean, we can do a really good job with the marketing and discovered that one of them, I questioned if they would invest in private prisons. So they went to their upstream, if you will, mutual fund company. And they said, well, we haven't decided that we won't. We currently aren't, probably won't, but we won't for sure say that we won't.
Hmm.
Well, along the way, I had a company that says that they're biblically responsible. I happen to be a Christian, so they were Christian, and they said they were biblically responsible. Oh, okay. Well, I asked them questions about private prison. Jesus actually said, "Go visit those in prison,
Hmm.
not go make money." I didn't take that as go make money. So they said, "Well, we don't have prison operators, but we have prison real estate holdings."
Hmm.
And I thought, I'm like, well, I don't want to go tell Gabe, who's my client, who says, I don't want to be in private prisons and go, well, what do you think about real estate versus operators?
Hmm.
Like it's like it's the mental construct is just way too much, right? So I'm like, no, I'm not. So that's the reason I didn't do business with that one firm.
Hmm.
And when the other told me they weren't going to do it, I'm like, well, I can't handle that personally. So I started looking around. Well, I found direct indexing and going to try to leave out some company names, but one of the companies was all good. And then they got purchased by another company. So then I was kind of left out and it was kind of an ugly thing, but it was who acquired them, I think made it ugly and made them get out of the holdings from any advisor. And I'm like, well, geez, that wasn't very ESG of you anyway, in the way that you handle us. So then that made me go and rethink and said, like with all of this going on, what if I just control the whole thing? And like, it's getting too crazy.
Hmm.
So I did my own research, discovered that I needed to change the investment recipe a bit, but I kind of blended a few others. I worked with um, another well-known person and gave him the idea, and he then created a version of his that was ESG. And I'm like, okay, I'm glad I did that. So I took all that stuff and then realized, wow, I could actually do this and get returns that most of the time are beating the comparable passive and comparable active by 200 basis points or so. Like it include my fee. Like that's the part that was blowing or has blown some people's mind. They're like, but that can't be because you added a fee. I'm like, well, why can't it be? And, we even did some research. It's kind of crazy. So like in Morningstar, it's something like this, that the highest return mutual fund, I think for it was either last year or last 3 years, was like 60% for like for S&P 500 tracking. But then there were a couple that were negative,
Hmm.
right? So I'm just saying, so that disparity, but if you ask most people, they would not believe that the disparity between, mutual funds could be that wide. So when I tell people, like they just because they keep thinking on average, right? Like that 10% average return of the S&P 500. And I'm like, but don't you remember 2008 and it was down negative 50 plus? So why do you keep staring at the 10% when it was down negative 50? I don't understand. Right. So that's why I encourage people to actually look at what we're doing. So now that, I just decided to take it over and that now I can, question directly to mutual funds or exchange traded fund providers. Why is, you said you were going to do this, or I can go check and does it say that they can't be in private prisons ever? Or like I can go in and kind of check the quality more. So, where before I was kind of believing others. So sometimes when you believe others, again, they're kind of good. And I'm not saying it's necessarily always greenwashing,
Yeah.
but sometimes, your idea, maybe like Gabe's idea and my idea may not be the same idea. So one of the beautiful things about your tool is I can encourage people to tell me what is important to them. So if you tell me you're a health defendant and a planet protector, and somebody else is a gender empower, and that's the only thing they care about, then their idea, or it's two different ideas. So sometimes, we like to just make a circle around everything and say, call it ESG, but, you know, what matters to me doesn't necessarily matter to you. So now, in certain situations, I can more tweak to what they want, their idea, rather than what my standard idea is for the practice.
I love that. I have a few follow-ups on that. The first, I'd love to dive in to I think a lot of people have a conception that ESG is ESG is ESG. It's one size fits all. There's a score. That's what the score is, and then that's what it is. But you're saying that that's not the case. That it seems like personalization is where people are going. Can you talk more about maybe problems you've run into with the one size fits all approach, and how do you have those conversations to figure out what people care about? And then what do you do with that information when you realize that people do care about it?
A few years ago, a friend of mine who was in the nonprofit world, but his firm did consulting. But we were having some Indian food, this nice Indian restaurant here in Chicago,
Mhm.
and this idea came up. So they were kind of like, you would think an ESG company. Well, by the way, none of their 401k stuff was screened. And when I kind of brought it up, it got poo-pooed a little bit because some of the people have this idea of like, well, but isn't all capitalism, like it's bad some kind of way, but we kind of deal with it because we're not I'm like, no, 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 no. Well, we got deeper into the conversation, and it was very clear amongst four people who were quite vocal that they all did not share the common view of what ESG was. And that was very eye opening for me, to the extent of the dissension for people who already worked in the company, but their dissension was really crazy. So I'm like, well, okay, but then we didn't really have the tools to necessarily parse it out. So we had companies more kind of giving you an idea, but we didn't have like, let's go deeper into certain categories. So one of the things I like about your stuff is it goes and highlights categories. We recently had someone who actually wrote in the comment section of the score wanting to focus on ESG, but his others answers are like, well, why did you did like five categories. Why did you highlight one? I don't know if he fully got it. So we'll be investing his money this week, by the way. So thank you, Gabe. And into all of the things that he said mattered to him. So I said, you don't have to necessarily choose. And I said, but we do have an investment that if you want to be, well, what do I used to call it? More environmentally focused, we can add this one, which you'll just be more to that versus if we don't add that. And then showing you, but if we don't do that, this other one's pretty good at that, and you're going to get better returns. So it's up to you. Would you want to be more purist, knowing that you're going to give up, I think about 1% in our model, still beating the other models of telling you we benchmark ourselves against it.
Make sure I understand. You're saying that this person came in and they said they want to focus on the environment, but then they took the questionnaire and there are also all these other issues that
Yes.
showed up as important. And you're saying, hey, yeah, we can focus on the environment for you, but we can also do all this other stuff. You care about racial justice and gender equality. We can do that for you too. And that was
Yep.
something that they didn't even realize was possible.
Yep. Yep. And sometimes it's interesting that people will fill out a survey, and what they would have said, their score doesn't come back saying the same thing. Their score says something else was more important. And I
Mm.
think that it's a lot of it, like, hey, the reason I called you, I read that article on private prisons. That really got me. Okay, now I could dive into the pool of private prisons, or what we do is, no, I send people through the survey. Okay, so I'm going to send you through the survey because it might highlight other things. And I don't want us to be down the road and saying, well, I didn't know you did that. I'm like, no. So that's why we're going to send you through the process, get it all out right now, and then say, okay, this portfolio. Now, we had one situation where it's a large nonprofit, and they're really about like racial justice. So we took it and we then went heavy to racial justice. and it still gets some of the other, in the way that we're investing, still gets some of the other things like climate, but it's underneath, like that climate is an issue that is a racial justice issue, as opposed to it's climate out front and race is back. So, so I'd say, so depending upon your investable amount, we can do different things, but again, fill out the survey so we can have a better idea of what the conversation is. So, so I've enjoyed, kind of, when I decided that I could take it over. But when I decided I could take it over, I hadn't had my relationship with your stake. I hadn't had my relationship with Morningstar and, John Hale, who's been a longtime buddy of mine. I, had found some of the other resources online that are there because I've written another article that talks about some others. So when you discover all these tools, you're like, oh, well, man, I wonder if those other portfolio managers and how they're coming to the screening. But, once you understand, to me, like, I even tell people Vanguard has a couple of choices. What percentages you should use, they don't tell you. But all they did was go find somebody's index and said, we're going to replicate the index. They didn't personally decide, we really care about this. Potentially, demand said, we should have a couple of choices. I met somebody who worked at Burger King and they talked about knockouts. So, the reason they have certain things on the menu is so, well, if Gabe says, I want a salad and they don't have a salad, then, the family might not go to that restaurant. So they have some things on there so they won't get knocked out. Although that's not what they're ever going to say. We're not the salad place. We do burgers. That's what we do, but we don't even do
That's
burgers per
fascinating.
se. We do fast food and it's a
Yeah.
knockout, right? So our mutual fund companies kind of doing, is it their heart? So I said, the heart of my company was built from me getting in the industry with my own problem in 2006. And the reason I've been passionate about this, right, has been because I have been one of the affected populations for the very thing. And I said, I think if you're not one of the affected populations, you may not be potentially as passionate. Not to say that you can't be, but what's driving? So often people have a personal story of some sort. They go, that story led me into where I'm at today.
Wow, that knockouts idea, that really clicked for me. It makes so much sense, and I think that correct me if you're seeing something different, but it seems like a lot of fund managers today have that knockout approach. They need to have some sort of ESG fund so that they don't get taken out of the running for people that are looking for some sort of solution. But that means that what you were talking about before, the due diligence to make sure that this is legit and this is credible and they're taking a thoughtful approach. I love that you have this passion and knowledge about prisons and can really dive into deep conversations and press people on it. But for other issues where you're maybe not as much of an expert, or for people that aren't experts on some of the social and environmental issues, how do you do that diligence? How do you find out if the fund manager is doing really thoughtful, good work on these values without knowing everything about the issue? Do you have any strategies?
Well, I guess I've approached it a couple of ways. So I have talked to, well, often the approach, I'm going to just contrast. So often the approach would be, you know, pull up your Morningstar and search for something and put in your portfolio.
Mhm.
I've talked to every company that I have my clients' money invested in. So I've had a conversation.
Yeah.
I can't say that I could rattle off their approach perfectly because it's their approach. They should be better than me. Right. Like, but I'm the recipe dude. I said, come to me for the recipes.
Mhm.
Right. So I'm the recipe guy. And in fact, well, the first time on audio video, we're calling our portfolios Envision Justice series. So, Envision's in the name, and we're saying Envision Justice. So that's what I'm trying to build. And I've got to go and say, so the recipe, needs ingredients. So if I need a large cap, I need an international, I need a bond, then that's your role, subcontractor. If switch the analogy a little bit, subcontractor, that's your role to go do that. So however you do your thing, I need to understand it enough that I go, okay, I feel good about it. Like the one I told you where they told me, well, it could be a real estate, but not an operator. I'm like, okay, I'm glad that we had that conversation because I didn't want to get blind. That would have been a blind side, So anyway, so I've had enough conversation. So I've sold people if some issue comes up and that you need to learn more or the why, I'm willing to bring them, to broker a conversation. I intend to, at some point, to bring some of them into my own webinars or podcasts to let them talk about their particular elements so people can get a better sense. Because, I talked to somebody even this week and she's like, I was looking at my accounts and, the returns were pretty good last. And there's another one said the same thing. And if you knew them both, they're in the, they're in a world where they're experts in, say, racial justice and inequality. So for them to pause, I was kind of shocked. Like they paused and said, but I'm getting good returns. And I said, don't get framed out of what you told me. So one said to me, well, yeah, I guess principles over returns. I said, but you don't even know the returns you could have had with me. You just know the returns that you had as opposed to the returns you could have had with me. By the way, there's the whole volatility argument. So, we're using, modern portfolio theory and all those things in that genre of investing. So it's not just because, people love to tell you when their S&P's up, but they don't want to tell you about their 50% down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they get out and then I said, you never get the return you expect because you don't stay up.
Mm-hmm.
So to that, I really just got to say, here is you on your values. And at some point, look at any short run period, a day, a week, quarter, whatever, who knows that outperforms. I said, but over time, the consistency, and there's just more and more data about, companies who get the bad press releases and all the other stuff, we just love to talk about when stuff's up and not necessarily when stuff's down. Generally, I don't have to have those conversations because once people are in it, they're at least reminded that their values align. I've also started highlighting to them, like I had a friend of mine once who was concerned that these were not profits, right? I was saying like the ESG has so much education, but if we go to most people have no idea what they're invested in. Early in my career, a woman didn't know a stock from a bond, yet she was invested in her TIAA CREF account, had no idea stock from a bond. I said, so to bring up ESG and add some more unfamiliar terminology, and she doesn't know stock and bond, right? A bit crazy. So I said, so we start to tell people and explain. So I started taking the fact sheets and said, so here's the top 10 holdings. So if it's Apple or DocuSign or Zoom or whatever it is, they're like, oh, yeah, because see, you see that number, 7%, -2, -25, whatever the number is, that's what you're seeing. I want you to see it as here are the companies. So if you tell me that you think Apple is bad, then maybe we have a different conversation. So for him, the friend, I'm like, no. And then I showed him. So like there was one where you could show like every fund, it was creating like how many thousands it was. I'm like, you can look at this whole thing, but I'm just giving you an idea when you're invested in. And I said, because you didn't know, you were only thinking you heard ESG. Oh, scary. You turned, so people sometimes get scared about terms. They're even scared. Well, but they put me in a target date fund. Yeah. And I said, but I did a risk tolerance. Your risk tolerance says you're conservative and currently your target date has you in aggressive. Well, I guess if it's got me in aggressive, maybe that's what I'm supposed to be. I said, no, that's just what somebody else made a decision. When you
Yeah.
didn't make one on your own, I said, but it is considered malpractice if I don't ask you. Like, how did that happen? Don't ask them if they're in a 401k, but if they come to me individually, I'm supposed to ask them. Then I got to educate them towards what would be right for them. I said, but maybe if you're really conservative, you just rather save more money
Mhm.
instead of seeing it go up and down. And I said, because there are plenty of people that when they see their target date go down, they go to cash too. So, so I said, so if we include, I think that ESG is just part of the investing conversation. So, I started using the phrasing risk adjusted, return enhanced, values integrated portfolios. I know it's a long phrase.
Woo,
If
say
I
that again.
shorten it up, but we like to say it's rare VIP, Gabe. You look like a
Yeah.
rare VIP to me. Okay, but I wanted to say that the risk adjusted return enhanced, that is that solid modern portfolio theory, efficient frontier, add all that's behavioral, all that stuff into there. That's what that is. And then now let's go and start talking about values. And to the extent that I've been able to find out how to take the values inside of that and actually get even better returns is a plus. But I just don't go with it's about your values and I'm just going to get you into values. I want people to understand that, it's based upon a solid foundation of academic research and empirical evidence. And all I'm doing is just deciding that, instead of, let's say, Morton salt, we're using gray salt. It's just like different types of ingredients. I try to find simple analogies for people, right? So, what kind of tomato sauce or what kind of whatever you're putting in that you like. And in this case, you said you like when the values came in versus no values at all.
Yeah. I want to dig into something that you said. Sometimes your clients hear ESG or think about ESG and they get a little bit of a shock reaction. Do you think it's the term ESG? Are you using different terms? Do you just say values and do you not mention ESG? Or is that something that is working well? How do you choose your vocabulary to be able to keep people's peace of mind and not dive into things that maybe they're preconceptions or myths? Can you talk about how you navigate that?
Yes. So I like to just go with values. But okay, so if I take someone who I meet through whatever introduction, it's easy for me to go values as opposed to someone who might Google me, right? Might find the Forbes article and come because I read your ESG article or
Mm,
I read your this article or I read about, because, you remember the days it was socially responsible investing, right? It was SRI.
yep.
Okay. And then, some people are calling it justice. And I have another client, she calls it ethical investing.
Yep.
So there's lots of terms. So like in the article, again, on Forbes, I throw out all the terms, right? And my new marketing person is looking at, well, what's the SEO, right? For each one of those. So I'm like, I can kind of think that the people looking for ESG, they're kind of the different type, maybe more a little more educated about the topic in the first place, maybe do know a little bit more about investing. I think maybe the Addisina social justice folk, it was justice. I like justice. Oh, what justice? Right. And maybe they don't know so much about investing. I'm not saying that they do or don't, but I'm just trying to visualize like who are these people? And then there are the people who say, JB, I'm really concerned that I'm not going to be able to retire because I just don't have enough money.
Yeah.
And how much do I need to save? And it's so confusing. And I'm just tossing and turning. And, I've been working at XYZ company for 20 or 30 years and I got this and I got that over there. And I say, oh, I get you. I said, but let's start you from the beginning and help me understand your values. Oh, by the way, take my your stake survey. For anyone who thinks I'm plugging, this is truly how we're doing it now. So, so take the your stake survey. Oh, that was interesting questions. We didn't know about that. And I'll say, but I'm going to tell you how this, gets integrated into our investments and how we're going to deliver value to you. Because at the time, they didn't specifically come about investing. They came for the problem of a goal that they didn't think that they were going to reach.
Hmm.
So depending upon how the angle of the conversation comes, but the gentleman that I told you about earlier that said he was more, again, he wrote in, I'm more about climate and I want my investments to align with climate. He already came in with this notion. The lady who said, I want ethical investment. She already came, because she knew about it. That's what she wanted to do. But they weren't so focused on any specific goal. So, like, it wasn't about financial planning. It was more about investing. And I've already got some capital. Either I inherited it or I got it some kind of way. And I just want that aligned. And so it kind of depends on the audience, but the one to me that gets them all is your values, because to me that encompasses no matter which other terminology they most or re- relate to.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. We're seeing a very similar thing. We try to on our site never say the words ESG. It's funny, just in our own marketing, a lot of times we're using ESG because that's a buzzword that people are looking for, but it does also turn people off. And every advisor has a client that is afraid of the word ESG. So I do think talking about values, I mean, everyone has values. When you see the surveys about how many people are looking for it, the survey question is, do you want to align your investments with your values? Not, do you want to invest in ESG? So I think that's really clever as just a good idea to not put ideas in people's heads before they express what they really care about. That,
And I think a challenge with the ESG term. So, if you said, do you believe that companies should have good corporate governance?
yeah.
Right. But we don't say that. We say
Yep.
ESG. And some people wouldn't even know what that is. And you say, do you think that the boards of directors of publicly traded companies should be their frat brothers? Right.
Yep.
Okay. Do you think that boards of directors should be diversified and have minorities and women, represented? So that's a G. Now, the environmental, some people think that means that I'm going to be in an environmental company. They may not think that that actually means, well, am I driving a Tesla? I'm investing in Tesla, or, what is the building that the corporate offices of this company, you know, they, they, they've made it lead platinum, right? So I think the more we could talk, or like private prisons instead of S, right? So I think ESG is this term, which is like, one day I realized, what is TIAA? We call it TIA crap. It was for the greater good. Well, it's the Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association of America. I believe there's a third A that they don't even have, right? And I said, so then, well, what if people actually do? You're an annuity. For a lot of people who go, I hate annuities. Oh, Ken Fisher, I hate annuities. Well, what TIAA is in the name, but they don't give you the name. They give you the initials, right? So I said, maybe we lost something by, would TIAA get offended if I say insurance and annuity? Are we offended when we say environmental, social, and governance? And then maybe a backup is, are you familiar with those terms? And maybe the person isn't, right? So often the things that we don't know, we reject. We go to a foreign country, we go with, people that we don't know, they don't look like us. We start to reject things that we're just unfamiliar with.
Mhm.
So I think that sometimes we have to help the conversation for people and an assessment, and maybe, you know, run in with ESG, like, holding a poster, you walk and, start a conversation and say, like, so what kind of things what's your philosophy? Oh yeah. Okay. And then, are you familiar? Again, I've had conversation with people like on Vanguard and said to a guy, well, I just don't have that much money, blah, 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 whatever he's selling me. And I said, well, you know who I am. And I said, so are you familiar with their, KLD investment? I mean, it was like, of course he didn't, right?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I said, I'm going to give you this one and say, even if you, cause he was a pastor, by the way. And I said, even if you don't invest with me, I said, at least if you're going to say, cause he was, not only was he a pastor, he was doing some other kind of social stuff. And I said, because otherwise you are the, Monday through Friday, I'm supporting the system. And Friday night and Saturday and Sunday morning, I'm doing something different. But you're investing in the system
Mhm.
that's creating the need for what the work you're doing on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday morning. But but some of the people, they're afraid, we're afraid of change, right? I've never heard of it. Like, I'm like, well, I think it's 248 or something like that investments that Vanguard has. And I said, when I hear indexing, well, which one? Like, which
Yeah.
one? They got a lot. Well, the S&P 500 is usually the one, like the people want to act like, oh, I'm so smart at the S&P 500. I'm like, well, there's a lot more than the S&P 500. And why would Vanguard do more than the S&P 500 if that's all there is?
Mhm.
I said, it's the familiar term that you hear at night. Like another person, I would say, do you ever hear about the bond returns at night? What was the bond index today? No, it's the NASDAQ, the S&P. And I said, I don't really know anybody who invests in the NASDAQ, but they give you the number. And I said, I can even tell you like which one they give by the one that only has 35 companies, the one that's got, 100, the one that I can tell you which one's going to show the most volatility, but they generally are giving you the volatility. They're not telling you about, no, man, the bonds, nobody's excited about bonds. So why would we tell anybody about? I said, but you got bonds in your portfolio. In this case, he had 60% bond, 40% stock. He was freaked out over his investments.
Mhm.
And I said, so when people are freaked out about investments, to even bring in ESG at terms I'm not familiar with, SRI terms I'm not familiar with, right? Socially responsible, like, well, geez, this isn't that again, like my friend who thought nonprofits, like, well, you can't invest in a nonprofit, but that's what and he owns a business. So,
Yeah.
you might think, of course he would know. Like, we have to do these. No, the people don't know. They're really coming to us for our expertise. And sometimes, like with my friend who's a strong Catholic, I'm not a Catholic, but I went to Catholic school for 13 years. I'm like, dude, you can't not do this. And firstly, you just reject it. You're the one on your Facebook page talking about, your school and all, and you're not. Because again, but I think often advisors sometimes are afraid or either try to take the path of least resistance. But, when you have people invest in their values, when volatility does occur and inevitably is going to, you could at least point to the fact that, when we first started this conversation, you had that portfolio that was invested in all these things that you told me you were against. Yeah, the market's down, but you're also still invested in companies that you actually care about. And by the way, they generally are the ones who don't have those negative press releases because of bad governance.
Great. Excellent. So first, I love what you're saying, the examples of people that don't really understand ESG, could that be nonprofits and what's actually going on? One of the biggest points of feedback and things that we hear from advisors is they show a client an impact report. They start talking about, yeah, what ESG means. The E stands for environment. Companies are releasing toxic air pollution, including the water. Are you aware of that? And let's see how the companies in your portfolio are doing on those issues. And that's just something that's mind blowing, that they can actually look at issues that impact their daily lives that they think about, and that's tied to their investments too. Holy cow. It's such a cool thing to see people have that aha moment and realize, oh man, now they're awakened, and they start thinking about this. Do you have any stories of that as well?
Well, I have a few where, the person like kind of just didn't know. Finally, after a few years said, okay, here, take a look at my portfolio. And, it's a bad portfolio. Like it has an S&P Vanguard fund, S&P 500, and a Fidelity S&P 500 fund. It just give you the extent of bad. But and then it has 18 other investments for like, who the heck came up with this? So, after a while, you kind of know, like, well, I saw those two investments, so I already knew that you were going to get some bad outcomes. But, I think that still the challenge becomes is the person is still looking for return. So that's why I think it's sometimes take return backwards, right? If you have the portfolio and go, okay, I'm going to show you a portfolio that according to what you told me, it's got this return and here's the return of your portfolio if you have that story. And like, what? And I said, so did you ever know what was in it? So you probably related to, again, it said S&P 500 and some other names. I know how many, right? I've always thought about like, let's go to a bar before anybody started drinking and say, let's take 10 people and see how many of the S&P 500 we can name. And if they got 100, I'd be surprised with 10 people, right? I'd be surprised.
Yep.
So when you have people that it's like,
I don't know if I could do that
know,
myself, but
right?
I just gotta say, yeah.
Right. So people can't do that to say, do you understand volatility? So the US National is a financial capability study where most people can't get 3 out of 5 right. None of them ask, what is ESG? Right. And if we ask them, can you make more money or less, will you make less money because of it or whatever it is, right? I said, they have no idea, right? So they're looking to their friends. So often people are going to their friends for portfolios or, their family members. Well, this is what I do. I'm like, okay, just because they do it doesn't mean that's right. So, behavioral finance, people do the wrong things at the, wrong times. And some people do it wrong even when they know what right is. So, I just think like putting it in front of them, sometimes they still have to sit back and go, like, I didn't know. But then even after that, some of them still slip back into, but didn't they tell me I'm supposed to get the most return? So one of my questions to, folks is, do you know how much you need to save at what rate of return or how long to reach your retirement income goal?
Mhm.
No one has ever answered yes. That was truthful. I caught one who said, and they said, well, you had 27 other questions. I just didn't want to answer no on the first one. I said, okay. So this just to let you, they were uncomfortable with the truth. I said, you don't know. Okay. So in the process of planning, and when we say, okay, at some point, what up and down movement are you willing to deal with along with your savings rate? Then I'm just trying to get you that portfolio.
Mhm.
It no longer should be about which one made more or less. Now, that is the technically correct financial planning answer, but it's not usually what most people are thinking.
Yeah.
Even when they get to the rate, but shouldn't I try to get the most money I can? It's kind of what I said, but you don't do this on a daily basis. I try to have quarterly meetings with people, and the answer is no, because invariably more return most of the time means you took on more risk.
Mhm.
People love crypto and Bitcoin when it's up. They don't even know, they're not calculating down as as a possible risk at the time they're talking about it.
Mhm.
Right. So, but that's what we're trying to do. So I think we just have to have, continue to reinforce the message with those who do we come in contact and continue to reinforce the message to help them with those challenges.
James, loved having you on. Thank you so much. Do you have any final things that you want to share?
No, I think you have been one of the best interviewers I've ever had,
Oh
Games.
my God. Too kind. And I'll spill the beans. I You're the first person I'm interviewing for this series, so I will let you know how you stack up when I've gotten more sample size. Just messing, but I thought, yeah, those are some great stories. Really, really love talking to you. So this is a ton of fun.
All right. Thanks.
Cool. Have a good one, James.
All right. You too.